are you glad you married me? Like, do you still love me?
The better the communication, the better the sex, and the better the sex, the better the communication. I mean, why do you think communication is the number one thing that women complain about in their marriages?
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhoads.
And I'm Marilyn Rhoads. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. This is Brad Rhoads, and I'm here with two good friends and people at the very top of the list of who I respect in ministry and in life. And just had the privilege of getting to know them personally, and man, just treasure any time to hang out. Welcome to the podcast, Shaunti and Jeff.
Thanks for having us, Brad.
So today we're going to use ChatGPT a little bit. And ChatGPT says the number one complaint women have in marriage about their men is, why don't you guess what it is?
Oh my gosh. Well,
Lack of communication, I'm going to say.
I'm going to say lack of helping around the house, probably. If you ask ChatGPT that.
Jeff wins. Communication, lack of help around the house was number 3. So
But how about sex? Where was that?
For men, it was number 1. We're gonna get to that later. But for women, it was communication. And I know you guys have written a lot of stuff around the difference between men and women. And I do quite a bit of pastoral crisis counseling. And women feel isolated. They feel like they don't know their husbands. They don't feel connected. Why is it? Why do you think communication is the number one thing that women complain about in their marriages?
Well, do you mind if I just jump in there on that? So we've done a lot of looking at this over the years because, we're researchers, right? Like that's kind of the basis of everything we do is we do these research studies. And one of the things consistently that comes up over and over again is that men don't realize that just because you get married and you said your I do's, you watched her walk down the aisle, you're so happy you're married. You kind of, as a guy, think, okay, cool. Well, we're on to the next thing, like whatever it is. And you don't realize that deep in her heart, there's actually a question that circles, and it's very common. It's about 80% of women, depending on which survey we're talking about, that basically is like, well, are you glad you married me? Like, do you still love me? And one of the key ways for a man to show, of course I'm glad I married you, is to talk and to listen and to not say, okay, good. Now I'm just going to assume that you feel loved. And that one little pivot changes everything. When a guy recognizes that his wife has that, do you still love me kind of question in her heart every day? And she's looking for the answer to that every day. And the best and most important and most essential way of answering that question is going to her at the end of a long day and saying, what happened with that meeting that you had with your boss? I know I was praying at 2:00 when that meeting happened. Tell me about it. And literally to say, tell me all about it. Like, that is speaking to the heart.
It is. Women. And it strikes fear in the hearts of a lot of guys. I mean, it really does, because one is, we live with our guy brains, and those sorts of things don't necessarily hit us the same way as far as what we desire. We do want closeness. We do desire that.
But you're worried. When you say that hits fear into a guy's heart, from the guys, you think that we want you to be our best girlfriend.
Correct.
No.
That the rest of our evening is going to be spent with Miss. And that's not the case.
That's not the case.
And so, but because we believe that, we have a tendency to just not go there. And then we think that, well, she's kind of like me, must be, that it's not that big a deal. And we, just cease to be curious or to think about these things. And those two different separate ways of living life kind of just widen. The separation widens over time.
And then the wife feels emotionally starved. I mean, I'll give you an example.
Right.
I'll give you an example.
Right.
Last night, I had a big meeting with somebody. Marilyn said, "How did it go?" And I said, "Well, we just kind of talked about life." And she said, "Well, how did it go?" I said, "Well, what anything big is talk about life. I just moved on." And as you're saying that, I just left her starving. Like she wanted more.
Exactly.
She wanted to know. She wanted to feel close. I was tired. Just didn't want to. I didn't want to go there, so I just didn't. So don't guys have to consider the interests of their wives and say, "Look, I'm going to offer you all of it, even if it's unnatural, because I love you, and I'm going to give you my whole heart, just like I want your whole body."
Yeah.
Well,
I think, at least some of the things that we've kind of learned over the years, it's just out of our own personal experiences. Sometimes in that moment, Brad, when I feel that same way that you do, if I were to say something like, "Hey, I would love to engage and give you more details," I am just whipped right now. And I promise that tomorrow morning, after a good night's sleep, I'll share what it was. Because
You're giving me too much
pretty
credit.
helpful.
You're giving me too much credit. I wasn't whipped. I just didn't want to talk about it. yeah. So.
well, can I draw a parallel?
Sure.
To something that probably many of the men are interested in.
Mhm.
Some of the women too, of course, but it's actually, there's a parallel here to physical intimacy. A couple of years ago, we have this weekly blog, and we do articles. It's just part of our ministry. And we had a series called the Sex and Conversation series. And one of the things that many men aren't aware of is that just like some women have to be thinking, and this is something we can talk about if you want, there's a physiological reason for this, but many women have to be thinking ahead about, I bet, it's been a few days or it's been a week or two, whatever your kind of frequency is. I bet he's thinking about intimacy, right, for tonight. And, I'm chasing kids around. I'm not there, but I'm going to start thinking about it and anticipating it so I can enjoy it when that moment comes. And it's the same thing with conversation. It's the same thing with you saying, I'm going to preserve some energy today because I know when I get home that Marilyn's going to want to know what happened with that meeting. And I want to be able to share that with her because it's important for me to be able to say, here's some of the things that happened. And then if it goes longer than you can, to say, "Hey, can we talk about this over coffee in the morning? Because I am ready for sleep." Those two things, sex and conversation, may not seem very parallel, but for most, not all, but I'd say based on our surveys, somewhere around 75% of couples, it is parallel.
Yeah, it's the better the communication, the better the sex, and the better the sex, the better the communication. I mean, it's a very synergistic aspect to marriage.
It is
It
because you're becoming one more and more. I mean, it just makes sense. It's the way God described it. He kind of knew what he was doing.
Yeah. So guys, generally speaking, your wife wants to communicate with you. And when she asks you a question, give her as much detail as you can. Because it serves her. And to be a good communicator, you got to be a good talker and a good listener. So now let's shift to the Chat GPT. And y'all already guessed it. The number one complaint men have about marriage is sex. Why do you think men's number one complaint about marriage is sex?
Well, I can actually tell you statistically one of the main reasons for that, because that was one of our very recent studies. We did a book called Secrets of Sex and Marriage with a renowned sex therapist named Dr. Michael Seitzma, and did this big study on what is kind of going on under the surface. And what we found is that 79% of couples have a mismatch on desired frequency. And most of the time, it is the husband who wants more intimacy, wants more frequency than the wife. It's not always the case. I think it was about 9% or something of women who wanted more. But one of the main things that's going on is that so many of those husbands assume that the reason that it's not happening as much as they want is that she just doesn't find me desirable, right? Like there's this really depressing kind of feeling that guys kind of internalize, like, I must not be enough of a stud for her, right? Like that's kind of what's going on in many men's hearts, and it's not the case usually.
And another thing that the psychologists use this term, attribution error. And it is this idea that we attribute certain things to our spouse that are just not correct about them, the way they're thinking. And so the guy is thinking, she never wants to have sex. She maybe wants to have it once every 3 weeks. Whereas for me, maybe the guy is thinking 2 to 3 times a week would be, kind of the sweet spot, but she's nowhere close to that. And in actuality, in the survey, it is the women are much more interested than what the guy is thinking.
Absolutely. Actually, it was one of the really encouraging findings on that survey, Brad, is that actually both the husband, I should explain, we did a matched pair survey, which is a fancy way of saying it was a survey anonymously of husbands and wives, and we knew who was married to each other. Like survey taker 137, husband was married to 137.
So you could ask the man, what do you think your wife thinks about this?
Correct.
And then you could get the actual answer from the wife.
Yeah. And what we actually found, bottom line on this survey, this was a nationally representative, very expensive survey. Bottom line is that both the husband and the wife both wanted more sex than they were having.
That doesn't.
So if that's the case, why aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you think
that's the right?
Do you think one of the reasons is that, I find that life is complex and stressful. And oftentimes pursuit precedes desire. You pursue one another, then all of a sudden, but people don't realize that, and they feel like if I'm just not hot to trot, we just won't have sex. And there's this lack of seeing it as a discipline. I mean, I'm 57 now. It's not like that I'm just sitting around, but every time we come together, I'm glad we did and I enjoy it. So I think there's more to sex than just like getting all hot to trot and going at it.
So you are mentioning something really important, Brad. Do you mind if I just explain one of the key things we found in this
I would love
study?
Research.
Okay. So in the research, one of the most important things, and this is something that Dr. Seitzma, our co-author on this, that he had been studying for years and years and years.
And he teaches at six
different seminaries
around the nation. So, I mean, he's highly respected, on this particular case.
Many of the Christian sex therapists.
Correct.
But one of the things we quantified is that one of the, I guess you could say, biggest misunderstandings is that it's about when one person wants more sex than the other, that it's about somebody having a lower libido. Like that's
what we think together is the only reason.
And it's usually her, right? It's not always, but it's usually the wife who has, maybe a lower sex drive. And so it's a lot of pressure on the person with the lower libido, because if you think, well, that's the reason we're not connecting, it's all on her. Or in the cases where it's the man with the lower sex drive, it's all on him. And it turns out, no, that's actually not necessarily the biggest thing. The most important thing is often that there are two different types of desire, not levels, although the levels matters. It turns out, how you said, Brad, that, sometimes you're just not hot to trot. Well, it turns out there are two different types of desire, and one of them you are always hot to trot, and you could call that initiating desire. And that's the person who feels that sense of desire and does something about it. That's what you see in Hollywood, right? That's what you see in all the movies. The guy and the girl look at each other and they're like, ooh, there's a hunger, and pretty soon they're in bed. Well, okay, that's initiating desire. But 55% of people have a different type of desire. That's called receptive desire. And the person with receptive desire, it turns out, which is usually the wife, not always, 73% of women have receptive desire. it turns out that that person feels desire physiologically in the reverse order. And that person doesn't usually feel that sense of hunger. And instead, they decide to get engaged. Just what you were talking about, right? Like you make a decision, and I think 38% of men,
Yeah,
if I'm remembering
I think that's
correctly,
right.
you make a decision to get engaged with your spouse. And as your body, as your physiology starts getting stimulated, assuming that you view it positively, that this is a healthy relationship, all that then that sense of desire kicks in that maybe your spouse felt 10 minutes ago. And most people don't recognize that the person who has receptive desire, they just need to be approached differently. Like they've got to know what you've got on your menu for the evening before you get to the bedroom. Or if you've got two receptive desire people, then maybe schedule intimacy so that gives you that sense of, okay, I know that on Thursday when the kids are out at volleyball, that's when we kind of connect.
Because this is important to us. It's not just this is a chore that we have to
It's
accomplish.
because we know that this is a part of marriage that God created.
It's a good chore. Yeah. So
It is a good chore.
I mean, one time somebody told me marriage is work. And, I told them, I said, well, if dating Marilyn, having dinner with Marilyn, talking to Marilyn, having sex with Marilyn's work, I'll sign up for the shift, so. But, I mean, I've said it. But also, I've noticed personally, and I would like you to comment on it, it seems like when people get in better patterns sexually, the more they have sex, the more they want to have sex. Yes. And the less they have sex, the less they want to have sex. And oftentimes they kind of settle into a suboptimal norm that they're both okay with it. But when they start being more intentional with their sex life, they actually find themselves wanting to come together more often. Is that accurate?
I think so. And one of the worst things that happens is when you start sliding down that pattern, and we have an enemy that wants to pollute our thinking and corrupt our thinking about our spouse in such a way as saying, she never initiates. Mm-hmm. She never pursues you. So therefore, she really doesn't care about this. You need to just stop until she starts to initiate. Mm. Put it on, and then we'll see. And those little things build on one another. And we were talking once, we'd gotten done with a conference. This was one in Hawaii.
Yeah, I remember
and a beautiful, middle-aged woman, came up and said,
and we were talking about this
topic. And she said, my husband told me that he was tired of initiating. And
because he assumed it meant I didn't desire him.
Correct.
I didn't initiate.
And she said, and I told him, I just can't. That's just not me. And so he stopped. I stopped. And we haven't been intimate in 22 years.
Wow.
And I just thought it's because of things going on in our head. And they're lies that the enemy tells us about ourselves and about our spouse. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Wow. So what do you tell, because like a lot of times sex feels pressure, especially to wives sometimes, I'm not. So how, if sex is the number one complaint husbands have about their marriages, how do couples start creating better habits together? What would you advise them?
Well, one of the most important, there's two really crucial pieces of the puzzle. One is for each other to understand these emotional and physiological factors. Because if you don't recognize what's going on, you can make a decision to do something in a certain way, but if you don't understand the why underneath it, it's not going to last very long. And so in general, most of the time, we tell the wives to understand just how much sex is central emotionally to a man's heart, and that it really fills up this thing in the core of him that does wonder, like we said at the beginning, everybody has different insecurities. And for a man, the insecurity is,
am I enough?
Am I enough? And the physical intimacy with his wife was filling up this place that's just longing to be desired by his wife. And it's not this selfish demand, although I'm sure there are some marriages where that is the case. But in the vast majority of cases, It's just a man with a vulnerability who's longing to feel desired. And understanding that will make a pretty big difference to your motivation to want to reach out to your husband. On the reverse side, one of the things that a lot of men need to understand is the fact that if she's not initiating, it's not because she doesn't desire you. It is because there's this different physiology that's the case in 73% of women. And that different physiology, if she has that receptive desire, she really truly needs anticipation time. She really truly needs to know that this is what you're thinking for tonight or for tomorrow morning or whatever, so that she can start anticipating that.
And that desire in her, I want to be pursued.
Yes.
I want to know that he wants me, not just in this one way, but in other ways. He is happy he married me. He's in love with me.
Well, if you think about it, the person who has receptive desire, again, tends to be the wife, but 38% of men as well. The person who has receptive desire, you're making a decision to get engaged with your spouse based on how they've made you feel the rest of the day.
And for men, do you find that as men get older, the desire becomes more receptive?
It does, statistically. Yeah, when you look at the age graphs, most men start out as initiating desire. And I think it's about, was it 16% of women, I think, had initiating desire? 20, I can't remember.
24%.
24% of women had initiating desire. Starting out, the women's percentage stays flat their whole life. If they start out the men's
Nope.
the
You're
women's
correct.
desire, yes, the women's desire, if they start out after the newlywed year, if they have initiating desire, it stays flat the whole life. Like they're going to be 70 years old and still have initiating desire. With men, it starts going down gradually. So men are more likely to start out initiating. And then as they get older, that 38%, the majority of that is actually men who are over 50.
So I'm going to embarrass Shaunti here.
No, please don't.
We never talk about our own stuff so much other than sleeping in separate rooms. But, one of the times you opened the door to this, Brad, when you were just kind of talking recently. But Shaunti at one night, and she just kind of said, "So what are you thinking about over there, on your side of the bed?" And I knew what that code was for. And I said, "Honestly, I'm just really, really tired right now." And she went, "Oh, okay." And then I said, 17-year-old Jeff would be so disappointed in me right now.
Yeah, it's true.
Because 17-year-old Jeff thought that this moment would never, ever possibly happen.
Yeah. That's
And it just, as you age, man, it's there.
And that's why I kind of present. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, but that's why it was so crucial for us to get the data and
Correct.
the statistics, so that a man who is in his 50s is going, I don't actually have all the same
Bells going off.
as I did. Is something wrong with me? No, that's just these are the patterns. And it's many men still have initiating desire all the way into their 80s and 90s.
So,
And some men switch to receptive desire.
well, I've often comment on this. I've said when you're younger, the desire precedes the pursuit. When you get older, the pursuit precedes the desire. Because once you start pursuing, it brings the desire alive,
Right.
which is more receptive. And before, the desire brings about the pursuit, which is more initiative.
Yes.
So,
Great way of putting it,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
but it takes discipline, because loving people is doing what you don't feel like doing in the moment. And as life gets more complex and it has stressors and it has things, you just need to come together because it's good. And
it's the core of what you guys teach at Grace Marriage.
Yes.
It's grace. It's humility toward one another.
Mm-hmm.
It is that leaning in and going, okay, maybe the world isn't exactly as it's happening in my mind right now. Maybe I need to, take a different different stance on
Well,
something.
Can I just say, there's a lot of men listening to this who, when you guys talk about, making a decision to do this, that they're like, but I want my wife to want to rip my clothes off.
Mhm.
Right? Like I don't want her to okay, it's time to, anticipate this and start thinking about it. And I don't want that. I want my wife to want me. And it's like, okay, I know you do, but let's work with how God created our physiology, because that's how you feel. And it is so crucial for us to say, this is how God has wired my spouse in a good way. It just happens to be
Different.
than what I think it
and
should
it's so weird, Brad. When Shaunti and I go to the gym, I don't in any day expect her to get on the bench press and lift as much weight as I do. I just don't. Her physiology is different. And yet in this one area, I just think it must be the same as mine.
Yeah. And you're so right. I mean, I was teaching a Sunday school class on sex once, and a guy stood up and said, I'm just going to say it. We want you to want us. That's what he said.
Yep.
And to your point, they do, but it's different. And if you don't get it, and then when the man stops pursuing because of that, then the woman oftentimes feels unattractive, not desired, not loved, and it puts it sends them into a bad cycle.
Absolutely. In answer, by the way, I want to come back to the question you asked about, if you are having sex, does that lead to a positive cycle? And not, if you're not, does it lead to a negative cycle? And the answer actually is yes, because apparently when you look at the neuroscience on this, and I've read a bunch of these studies and they make my eyes roll back in my head because they're so complicated. But the bottom line is that sexual activity does stimulate testosterone and other sexually stimulating hormones. And so when you actually keep a level of engagement in that way, it keeps your sexual hormones at a level where you stay interested to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, they reduce and reduce and reduce to the point where it's actually much more challenging to start going down that path. And so there's been different studies, and it doesn't look like there's any one correct answer to this, but in general, like the sex therapist world, they see that roughly, if you can aim for engaging with your spouse in that way roughly once a week, it seems to have those kinds of positive physiological and emotional impacts when it comes to sex. So
that's great. Well, thank you guys for being on the podcast. It's Jeff and Shaunti. They're like a buffet: money, sex, communication, men and women differences. They're very analytical. They're very smart. They've done tons of research. So really, whatever you need, Jeff and Shaunti have something for you. And why don't y'all share, where do our listeners find it?
Well, the easiest place is to go on our website, which is shaunti.com, SHAUNTI.com. And we have a podcast you can get to called I Wish You Could Hear This. You can look that up on any of your podcast channels. The blog on the website, we have a weekly blog. It's equipping basically for anybody who cares about this kind of stuff. It's just a ministry that we do. And we also speak, and we love speaking at churches. And I do women's events. So we really enjoy that as well.
Well, I highly recommend everything they do. And thank you guys for being on the podcast. And, our podcast is largely to keep marriage front of mind and to keep you investing in marriage. And we know that unless you're intentional, life will take over. Your marriage will go back of mind and it'll stagnate and go flat. And if you just hear a good speech or read a good book and then go about life, you'll revert back to those patterns. So at Grace Marriage, we have an ongoing process to help you keep implementing the rhythms that bring about a healthy marriage. So check us out at gracemarriage.com. If you're in Grace Marriage, don't schedule over your marriage. If you're not, bring it to your church. Jeff and Shaunti, thank you for your ministry, but more than that, thanks for your friendship and authenticity.
Thanks so much, Brad.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast.
To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.